G'day, good afternoon, and welcome to BHN Dunedin specials for the Dunedin Mayoralty Conversations. And Lee Vandervis, we welcome you to the show this afternoon. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you for.
Where are you currently?
Northeast Valley.
Oh, good. Cheers.
So yeah. No. It's I know it's a bit kind of weird doing it on the internet thing, even though we're in the same city. But we were planning these. We didn't quite know what was going to be happening with restrictions, and actually, the good thing about this is you don't have to travel, you don't have to park, you don't have to set aside an extra half hour for that side of it. You just jump in your own house or your office and have a chat. So I think it's kind of a good way to do it, especially when mayoralty candidates are obviously so busy. I imagine you've got things on, I was going to say 24/7, I'm being silly, but all the time, every night, all the way up to election, surely.
Oh, there's been quite a bit of it, but probably the parking's the biggest plus on account of the previous couple of mayors that keep chopping it back in the middle of the city.
Well, I'm lucky. I work out of my home, so parking on the street would have been fine. But anyway, we've set it up. We're good to go. It's good to have you with us. You're episode 7 of 11. Every candidate is coming to join us, and thank you for being a part of it. Look, I guess we have to start with the events of yesterday in the High Court, because that's something that's made nationwide news, and it seems to be something that's flowed on for 3 years now. And it would be good. I've been saying to people, Lee, I don't know if you've seen any of the conversations, that one of the reasons I like doing these is not just to see people's billboards and where they sit on things like, what's happening in Dunedin at the moment. It's the George Street pedestrianisation, it's the 3 waters, it's the one-ways, they're the big things. Most people can get a bunch of that information from a billboard. One of the things I like to be able to do is think about the things I don't know about, the issues you don't know about yet, the issues that are going to come up in 2023 that no one knows about yet. If we get to know the candidates a bit better, then it gives us an understanding when, other issues came up, how they as our mayor may react to that. And that's been a big part of the driving factor for these conversations. Me as a ratepayer and a voter, I want to learn more about all of the candidates, and hopefully when we're doing this, people watching and listening will do the same specifically for Dunedin. So that's sort of what it's all about. So yesterday in the High Court, the situation, and I kind of do want to go take a step backwards a little bit, because as you'll appreciate, different people are saying different things about why this was all happening. Yes. Some people are saying it's about a parking ticket, and some people are saying it's about a censure, and some people are saying it's about clearing my name because clearing your name because you're accused of sort of using your power against an employee. So I do want to clear it up, and I want to have clarity for myself and for others. But the first thing I want to do is just to go back to the very start, because I read an article, I think it was yesterday, and it set out the catalyst for this whole conversation that it referenced as the parking incident, which sounds very serious, the parking incident. So what is being reported, and tell me if this is correct first, that you were issued a parking ticket because you put $4.20 into a meter, which listed parking as $2 per 30 minutes, but you didn't see the sign restricting the parking to 30 minutes. So when you came back after an hour, you had a $12 ticket. Is all of that accurate?
No.
Okay, so what was the situation?
The sign that was visible from the footpath said $4 per hour. I was there for a bit less than an hour. I had paid $4.20. The other signage was on the street side of the meter that you couldn't see. There was 2 other problems with that meter. One of them is that it was supposed to not accept more than 30 minutes worth of change. Right. So the coin retrieval system wasn't working properly, and it only gave a receipt for 30 minutes, despite the fact that I'd paid more than double that. Right. So there were 3 problems with that meter. They were all subsequently fixed. The meter maid that was there giving me the ticket said, "Oh, look, you should pop on down to customer services and tell them that the meter's faulty, that it's got the wrong signage on at least one side of it, and they'll sort it out." Well, eventually they did sort it out, but the person at the customer services desk didn't want to know.
Okay, well, let's pause on that bit, because that's going into the next part of the conversation. So you're saying that it's accepted that the signage was wrong for the actual incident of the parking
Yes.
That's been accepted, because I haven't seen or read that. I don't know, but that's been accepted. That they made
there's photos of it on my Facebook page.
Okay. Unfortunately, you blocked me on Facebook for a while there, Lee. So I don't have access to your Facebook page to go and check that. But that's
well, if I've blocked you, it's probably because you said some rude words on my Facebook page, which is the reason I block people.
Don't think I've never spoken on your Facebook page, but I think we have spoken on the Dunedin News page. So I don't think I've ever been on your. I don't think I've ever been on your Facebook page. Anyway, now the High Court. Now the article says an earlier High Court judgment. So I don't know whether this is yesterday's decision or previously, identified the parking incident as a relatively innocuous event that was the catalyst for the ongoing. Would you agree with that? The actual parking issue was relatively innocuous, and so that means to me
it's actually pretty much irrelevant.
Yeah, so because that's not what the following process was about, correct?
No.
Okay, gotcha. So I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, the following the dispute within council, because after the parking ticket, this is what I jotted down. Tell me if this process is correct so far. That the $12 parking ticket interaction, which we'll talk about, led to a staff complaint. No need to comment on that yet. That led to a council investigation, which was upheld. That led to a High Court application by you, which was unsuccessful. That led to an appeals court application by you, which was unsuccessful. That led to yesterday's Supreme Court's decision. Is that the process through? That's all accurate?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So now explain to us what that was all about, from the relatively innocuous event leading to being in Dunedin's, I'm assuming, Dunedin's High Court yesterday, and having your complaint not upheld.
The initial complaint that is beginning this all was me complaining of the customer services person refusing to take the details of the faulty parking meter. I showed her a photograph of the meter on my phone. It had the number on it. I'd been there before. I'd had them log faulty meters before that, and I've done it since then. But that particular staff member didn't want to know. She wasn't listening. She kept saying, if you want to get off the parking ticket, you've got to write in. And it didn't matter how many different ways I put it, she wasn't hearing anything else. So I made a complaint of her to her senior staff manager. That
and there was a reciprocal complaint. She made a complaint against you as well.
Just hear me out. So in the first instance, I complained that she wasn't doing her job just to her senior manager. What happened then was my complaint went nowhere, and a code of conduct complaint, an unprecedented staff code of conduct complaint, came from her. Now, in the past, code of conduct is a system that is only set up for councillors to keep each other in check. It had never, ever been used by anyone other than a councillor. And here we had a unique situation, an unprecedented, and my lawyer and I both agree, not proper situation, where a staff member, especially an anonymous staff member, can lay a complaint against an elected representative and then have that go through the code of conduct process. Worse than that, before it's gone through the process, leak details of the alleged complaint through social and print media, creating a massive smear campaign, which basically cost me the 2019 election.
So if hypothetically, if a person in a position of power within council, right? I don't want to, because obviously you're going to say this didn't happen, but I'm saying if a person in position of power of council acted inappropriately towards a staff member, what should the process be if that is the incorrect process for that staff member to lay a complaint against that councillor?
It should never be code of conduct. That staff member should go to the chief executive, and then the chief executive should take it up with me as an elected representative. When
you say it was unprecedented, are you saying that it's just never happened before, or are you saying that it breaks the the rules of council as to the way it was handled?
It's never happened before, and if you read the code of conduct, it very specifically says, and this is why I'm amazed that the High Court have not basically cottoned on to it, very specifically says that the Code of Conduct is basically there for elected representatives and the Chief Executive.
The High Court ruled yesterday that they said this, quote, "Nor do we consider there to be any appearance of a miscarriage in the way the lower courts dealt with this point." So they're saying that the High Court and the Appeals Court, no miscarriage of justice. They all. Do you agree with that ruling?
No. I mean, obviously, you know, I was the one at the sharp end of the stick. I was the one that basically had the smear campaign run against me for weeks prior to the 2019 mayoral election. I was the one that was defamed, that had a number of lies told about me, and the fact that they don't seem to have recognised that as being an issue is a serious problem for elected representation generally. The fact that an anonymous staff member can basically finger publicly an elected representative, and all the powers of the bureaucracy can be brought to bear to actually make that elected representative look like some kind of ogre in the public media. To me, that is just, I mean, elected representatives are wary enough as it is of criticising staff, but now it's just impossible. You can't do it. It's just far too risky.
You've taken defamation proceedings before. Dave Cull comes to mind. If
yes.
What you're saying is accurate, has there been a bunch of defamation cases against all these people who have been spreading lies and smearing you prior to the last election?
Sorry, I don't understand the reference to Cull and other people.
So you've taken defamation cases before.
Well, I believe I've taken one against Mayor Cull.
Okay, so what I'm saying is,
called me a liar. And
so what I'm saying, I'm saying is, you've done that before, so it's not something outside the realms of something you could do again. So if all these people, media entities, whatever, have smeared you and lied about you at the last election, have you taken defamation cases or claims against those people, those organizations, those entities?
No, I haven't.
What was the reason for not doing that for them?
The fact that the first and my only other defamation action took 2 years out of my life, $30,000, an incredible amount of stress. And in the end, I couldn't actually get the thing at the court because the DCC fronted several $100,000 worth of defence for the indefensible Mayor Cull.
Do you look back
I've got a pretty cynical view of courts generally, but that made me especially cynical. It's a very hard road to hoe. My lawyer told me that if you want to get into defamation action, you need to be a millionaire with lots of practice, with lots of patience, and I don't fit either category.
Do you look back now to 2019, and do you see anything that you could have, should have, wish you had done differently in this process?
Yeah, I wish I'd never bothered about this parking meter that had 3 separate faults with it.
Because that does seem to be something that, like, I think I sometimes think about, you know, what's this going to cost me in time and effort and energy versus the $12, even if you're in the right sort of thing. It does seem like a lot to load on to that, what has been referred to as a relatively innocuous event. What about through the process? Why didn't you at some stage just go, okay, enough? I mean, you just talked about the defamation being 2 years of your life and $30,000. This is now 3 years of your life. I don't know what kind of money it's cost you, but why at no point till you came to the very end? Why did you have to get to the very end of it before you went, yeah, enough is enough?
Because it sets a precedent. Under law now, the code of conduct can be used by any staff member, and there's 1,500 of them, anonymously, and they can say anything they like. There's no chance of cross-examination. I wasn't allowed to see any of the witness statements. I wasn't allowed to see the actual complaint itself. I only found out after the investigation had gone through what the real complaint was, and there was a number of aspects to it. And I wasn't allowed to see the video, which I now have and have put on my Facebook page and have put on my blog, Vandervis.com. and people can look at the video and decide for themselves whether they think I was being intimidatory, which is what was alleged.
Do you want to know what I think, out of interest?
Yeah, go on.
I looked at it again this morning, right? I've actually got it right here. I haven't showed you that we do this, but we sometimes do this and we bring up imagery and stuff and we can show people what we're talking about. Yeah. And I remembered thinking, gosh, I remember Lee Vandervis being quite aggressive at this, and I started watching it again and I went, well, maybe I'm remembering that wrong. And then it gets to a point, Lee, where kind of the pointing and stuff starts and the tapping of the table. And I talk about politics a lot. And, you know, perception is reality in politics. And I actually think, from someone who came into this today, when I first started playing this video, I kind of went, like I was thinking, well, maybe not. Maybe there's actually then making me feel like it does look like, I don't know about intimidatory. I can't say that, but certainly there's an amount of aggression there. For people who haven't seen it, I'll show them what I mean. I mean, there's no sound to it, but this is like all very much looks like, you know, talking, showing the ticket, showing the phone. And that's when I was like, oh, maybe I'm misremembering it. Maybe I'm being a bit of a drama queen and a bit dramatic. Showing the phone, like that's obviously the photo. You're showing the phone of the thing, but it's the hand signals at the end, and it looks like it's the pointing, and it's that. And I'm not even accusing you of being aggressive. I'm saying from the video, I feel like there's like this. You know, it feels like you're going, you should be doing this, and you should be doing this. That feels or looks to me to be aggressive. Again, it's a perception. I'm not saying it's a reality, but that's how I see it. And I don't know, what's most of the feedback you've got from people? Are they seeing it as not, or is it too long ago that who knows? Everyone's got a different view.
Oh no, there's plenty of people still talking about it. I mean, it's one of the most looked at videos around, and most of the people that speak to me obviously see it in a favourable light, but then they would have a favourable view of me anyway. Yeah. As regards the finger pointing, which is, you know, highlighted, the person behind the desk essentially was saying that it's not her job to take these details. And I was explaining to her, look, I have been there before doing exactly the same thing. I'm the person giving you the information. Your job, pointing at her, is to take down the number of this meter and record it so it can be fixed. And it's true, I was getting a bit frustrated with her at that point, since we'd been there for a few minutes. But the accusations are not just that I was possibly a bit aggressive, depending on how you define aggressive. The accusations were, particularly, and I only found this out after the investigation, that I'd tried to use my councillor position to get off a $12 parking ticket.
And I think that's where the court, I am hearing you. I'm actually helping you tell the story. That's what's the escalating court case, isn't it? That you want to prove that you didn't use you want it to be recorded that you didn't use your position to intimidate. That's actually what the court cases are all about, isn't it? Yeah,
and if you look at the video, you'll see that while I was there, I actually paid a $40 parking ticket, which was quite valid. So the payment of the parking ticket was never the issue. The issue was whether or not anyone can anonymously use DCC Code of Conduct and the DCC bureaucracy to smear a elected representative that, in this particular case, the chief executive was quite fearful might become mayor.
Do you think that you suffer a little bit death by 1,000 cuts? Because if this was a singular and solo episode that's been reported about you and your behavior, then it would be taken differently by many people than what appears to be several events, incidents, you know, a number of complaints. And
11 of them, in fact. There are 11 of them.
I was going to ask you about
there are 11 other complaints, supposed complaints. They all come from the same ex-chief executive Bidrose. And it's been very interesting that she's made a number of unwise tweets since she left the organisation, which highlight the fact that actually those complaints weren't against staff at all. They were her feeling threatened by my complaints of her. In particular, my complaint that she sat on a motion that I'd put for a Unitary Council investigation, and she'd sat on it for 2 years and simply refused to action it. This is bureaucracy running your democracy.
I was going to ask you about the complaints because I read an article in the New Zealand Herald talked about you editing your own Wikipedia page and about removing the 11 complaints of inappropriate behaviour which were attributed to Vandervis in August 2019. References to members of the public as targets of the behaviour were removed. If you've just said 11 complaints, why did you feel the need to remove on your own Wikipedia page the part talking about the 11 complaints?
Because they weren't true. And because that Wikipedia page is so utterly deficient that, among other things, it falsely claimed that Mayor Cull had accepted a bribe from a staff member. Absolutely, completely and utterly untrue. The Mayor Cull accepting a bribe falsehood on Wikipedia was the main reason that I actually went ahead and edited it and sorted out all the other completely wrong statements that were attributable on my page.
You talk about smear campaigns, and you do have I was going to say a history. I'm not trying to make it sound more dramatic than it is, but certainly there are several incidents where you claim that, the ODT is against you or stuff's against you, or, you've made a complaint to the Media Council about a photograph of the ODT of you, that kind of thing. Hang on. Now you let me finish. Right. Okay, I'll let you finish. Then I'll actually ask you the question. But I'm not in the council chamber. I don't see what's going on. I don't see what's going on in council. But when I say death by 1,000 cuts, in October of 2020, there was the whole situation around intimidating behaviour. And what I read into that, because I'm not there, is what the other people were saying. And you've got, I've got the article here from RNZ that talks about this. And an aside, Carmen Houlihan, I'll bring it up so people can see it so you know what I'm looking at. So the article is about the Dunedin Council are told to apologise for intimidating behaviour. And when you get other councillors, and they're not like your counterpoints, the other side, like this. Carmen Houlihan said she often voted with Vandervis, but his outbursts had become completely normalised, and that wasn't okay. It is not okay to not feel safe in your work environment. And right now, I do not believe his behaviour is safe or normal, and it should be not accepted. And I strongly accept this and condone this code of conduct. I don't know if other ones are typically voting more with you. I think Jules Radich is a bit more of a conservative, quote unquote, voter, but he says bullying comes in many guises, and he has good reason to feel bullied when his point of order was dismissed out of hand. He said there was aggravating factors, but he would still support the motion. And naturally, a fair degree of frustration would have welled up.
But hang on.
Let me just finish the quote. I'm just finishing the quote. Let me finish the quote.
You did the Houlihan quote first. Now you're doing the Radich quote. And you've glossed over the fundamental bit of the Radich quote where he was bullied, not by me, but by the mayor. Get that right. There's a lot of bullying goes on in politics.
Well, this is actually an interesting point.
And that's my experience of it.
I had Sophie Barker on a few weekends ago, and she said that the current DCC is the most toxic environment she's ever worked in. How would you respond to that?
Probably just about right.
Why do you think that is?
Benson Pope, Hawkins, Labour Party, basically forcing agendas on a city and on a bunch of councillors, most of whom don't really want to go along with it, but are forced to one way or another.
Why, if that is the case, why is it that it seems that a lot of the accusations that I read about, and I haven't seen everything, aren't the ones being labelled at those people, but they're being labelled at people like yourself?
Well, there's the phrase, the first defence of a bully is to claim that other people are bullying. And you only have to look at Councillor Benson Pope's long history. I mean, he was thrown out of Parliament for bullying. Thrown out of Cabinet for bullying. Also thrown out again, apparently, for telling lies. There is a long history of all kinds of toxicity. that has ended up in the DCC. I have been a target of a fair amount of it because I have enough of a vote buffer that I can afford to criticise staff and I can afford to criticise other councillors. Most of the rest of them just sit there meekly thinking, oh dear, I've got to be careful not to open my mouth and say anything because I might lose the 200 vote margin I've got to get re-elected. I've got a 3,500 vote margin, which is why I can actually afford to say what needs to be said. And a lot of things have needed to be said in the 15 years I've been on council.
You just said that, you know, kind of claiming other people were bullies was the first, could be the first defense, as you were claiming other people were bullies. You can see that irony there. You were just claiming other people were bullies, and you were saying that there's a lot of it there, and you listed people who are perpetrating it. Are you someone who you think at any stage has ever perpetrated, you know, bullying or toxic behaviour at council?
No, I've been loud, I've been forceful, and some people find that intimidating. I've been tall, I've been white, and I have a reddish face, and all of those things have been listed as being unacceptable. I can't change being tall. I'm not going to be quiet or soft-spoken because that suits other people's agenda. And I can't do anything about having a reddish face, especially this time of year when the pollen count is up. I have a bit of an allergy, and you'll see that I'm reddish in the face. It's just one of those things.
You've just said that being loud, some people may find intimidating.
Yes.
Does that not therefore mean that's intimidating?
No. That means they are hypersensitive, they are woke, and they shouldn't be in the kitchen if they can't stand the heat of politics. If they want a government job that's well paid and they don't have to do anything and don't accept any criticism and don't have anybody questioning what they do, then they're in the wrong job if they're in politics.
So you're kind of taking the position any means to an end. If they can't hack it,
not
it's their
at
problem.
all. What I'm saying is that the reality of trying to get anything sorted out on council as a councillor, and you're only one of 14, the reality is that to get cut through, you need to be able to put things in a forceful and provocative way. Otherwise, they never get reported. The issue never ends up in the media. And if it doesn't end up in the media, nothing gets acted on. I, as a councillor, have had more things acted on, I believe, pretty much all the other councillors put together in terms of sorting out serious problems at the DCC. I'm talking about not just the city fleet frauds, which were $1 million of cars going missing, and I had 300 emails to get that sorted. I'm talking about the $9 million that we lost on the Jacks Point Luggett subdivision adventurism by our council company directors. I'm talking about Yeldhurst that went much the same way. I'm talking about the contract corruption, which meant that we were paying contractors to clean mud tanks and they weren't cleaning them for at least a year on end. And the result of the 2015 flood, because those tanks were all blocked up, was $175 million worth of property damage and unending misery for a whole lot of people. I was onto that 2 years before. I got Fulton Hogan and the staff in to have a meeting about the fact that they hadn't been cleaning the mud tanks, even though they'd been paid to do them. And the people that had been paying them no longer work for the DCC. You don't get popular with staff when you actually highlight a lot of these issues which had to be sorted. If there was an easier or a nicer way of doing it, please give me some idea of how I might have gone about it. Also, in terms of the video that you showed before, there were 11 people that walked backwards and forwards behind me during that whole video. The accusation was that I was unspeakably loud during the whole conversation. Nobody even turned a hair or looked my way.
When you say if they can't hack it, what you're actively doing is saying, you know, I will be how I need to be. You guys either suck it up or, you know, fish or cut bait, suck it up or get out of the way. Is that kind of the philosophy?
What I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you
what you're saying is they have to handle how I am. If they can't hack it, you said, there's too much heat for them. That's about if they can't handle it, then they need to figure themselves out. So you're taking no responsibility at all for any alleged actions you're taking. It's all on the other people. Well,
the sensitivity is on the part of other people, certainly. And the accusation that I have had standover tactics just because I'm taller than they are, and that I've been red-faced angry just because I have a natural red face. All those things are things that I can't change. I mean, I could put makeup on perhaps. I'm not going to do that to please other people's sensitivity about redness. I'm just not going to. I do the very best that I can for the public that elect me. I'm not there to make friends with staff. I'm not there to make friends with other elected representatives. I am there to sort out the very considerable and deep problems that come with hundreds of millions of dollars of public money going through that organisation and trying to get better value.
But do you know what it sounds like to me, Lee?
Go on.
Respectfully, it just doesn't sound very smart. And let me explain why. I don't want to offend anyone by saying that, but I'll explain why. When I have a problem with a company, right? When a company pisses me off to the max, and I have every right and every reason to go off my nut at them, the actual way I get to the end of it and get the outcome that I want is to actually be cordial, to actually be calm, and to actually talk them through it and understand that the person on the phone is not the one responsible for my wheelie bin not being picked up 3 weeks in a row. It's not their fault. Be cordial and calm, and 99 times out of 100, it gets the outcome that I want. If I was going to be one of your, well, but that's not what. But that's not what you're saying. But that's not what you're saying now. If listen, you just I timed it. You just spoke for 3.5 minutes. You hear me out now, and then you can answer. I haven't asked you my question yet. If I was going to vote for you this time around, right, I would want you to be able to get the outcomes for me as a voter that would be best. And I just don't think if they can't hack it, get out of my way. You sound like a very much an individualistic, it's my way or the highway kind of guy. And I don't believe that's the best way to get outcomes when you need to work within a team. Because if you are mayor, there's still going to be, 13 other people that you have to get on board to get some of these things through.
Teamwork in politics is a myth. The power rests largely with the mayor. He decides what goes on the agenda, and then there's this great amount of bullying to make sure that there's enough voters there in the council to rubber stamp it. Getting back to your analogy with trying to get a result from someone on the phone when your wheelie bin hasn't been picked up.
Sure.
I'm with you exactly. The person on the phone is not in any way culpable. It's not the situation that you have on council. Worse than that, because of bureaucracy, and Dunedin's no different from any other council bureaucracy this way, are essentially self-serving and essentially status quo and are not set up to change anything unless they're forced to with public pressure. It's the bringing of public pressure, and I figured this out pretty soon when I became a councillor. It's the bringing of public pressure to bear on council that actually gets results. In the case of the Brent backup car, millions of dollars worth of car thefts, all my complaints to staff went nowhere. They didn't do an investigation for a number of years, despite the massive evidence I was putting in front of them. It was only when I made public the emails from Turner's Auctions, where they were complaining that they were valuing cars but never getting to sell any. It was only when that stuff became public and I made it public that we actually got investigation. So what I'm saying is that to do this particular job that I do, you have to be provocative, you have to be in people's faces, you have to get issues out into the media, and I believe I've done that more successfully than any other councillor.
But ultimately, you are only, as the mayor, and correct me if I'm wrong, I've never been in council, you have one vote of 14.
The voting has bugger all to do with it. What counts is what's on the agenda, and what the mayor and the chief executive decide between them is going to be presented as evidence in the reports.
So let's talk about,
believe me, have been anything but balanced in the past. They've got better. And one of the reasons they've got better is that I used to constantly complain that no staff member would put their signature beside a report. Now, all reports that come before council have the staff member who authorised them there and the staff member that wrote them. And that's been a significant improvement. And I've had to fight for improvements like that.
So if you as the mayor get to put on the agenda, pick a topic, I don't know, that the George Street, that there's going to be more car parks in George Street, whatever.
Yep.
And 13 of the councillors say vote against it. Doesn't that mean it stops that going through?
It does.
So how can you not basically say that you have to be able to work with a team to be an effective mayor?
No, as the mayor, you don't put that on the agenda until you've made sure that you've had a referendum gone out with ratepayers' rate demands first, and that the referendum has had a very big response showing that more parking is what everybody wants. You put that in the report, and your chances of getting the 13 voting against it become very low suddenly. If the councillors have proper information and proper consultation in front of them, then they're much more likely to do something that the public wants. I'm not there to push pet projects. I'm not there. I don't have any particular desires other than to see a much more democratic and a much more responsive to public wishes council. We have had completely the opposite the last 3 years, and they've added $100 million to our group debt doing it every single year. We're $300 million further in the can now than we were 3 years ago. And the mayoralty, quite frankly, now is a poison chalice. Whatever difficulties I've had up until now, if I get the mayoralty, that's when the difficulties will really start. How do you deal with $1.2 billion worth of debt that is costing council $1 million a week in interest alone? How do you do that? I've got ways of dealing with it, and I think I'm the only one that can. But everyone else is just looking the other way. They don't want to know about it. The ODT won't print, by the way. Sort of the
it's still to do with the conversation around the court processes. And excuse me if I
are you going to spend the whole 45 minutes talking about the $12 parking ticket so-called issue from 3 years ago? Because that's what cost me the last election. Are you going to make that cost me this election as well?
What I was about to say is,
are we going to talk about things that that the public are actually interested about? For instance, free water, the one-way street system.
What I was about to say, Lee, before you started filibustering again. What I was about to say before you started filibustering is I do have one other question that's just related to that, and then that's the last thing. And to be honest, we started talking a bit about that, and that actually flowed into another conversation about how council works. The last 15 minutes hasn't been about that, but there's one other question I wanted to ask you, which relates back to that, which actually has to do with something that you're being very clear on about the way council spends its money and wastes its money, right? Straight from your blog.
Extraordinary.
So I have a question. No, not right now, because I have a question for you, because this is a conversation between the two of us, and I ask you questions and then I stop talking and I give you a space to answer the question. If you want to have just like a solo broadcast, that's fine. It's easy to live stream.
Your questions have been accusations up until this point. I haven't had a question on any of the $1 million or $1 billion issues facing the council. You haven't asked me one question regarding the extraordinary waste that this last 3 years has seen on council. You have basically used it to attack me on the same way that I was attacked at the last election. And quite frankly, that's disappointing. It's an incredible misuse of this situation for you to avoid the real issues. The real issues are debt. The real issues are parking. The real issues are traffic flow. The real issues are lack of consultation. And for the last 3 years, this council going against the biggest petition that they've had, 6,500 signatures wanting George Street to be two-way, against their own submissions process, where they said all the 200 submissions wanted to have a zero rates increase. They put it up by 9.8%. All of those things haven't been touched by you. You haven't gone there. I want to know why. Why have you wasted this whole time talking about things that are related to an incident 3 years ago?
Because this is my interview.
What's going on now?
Because this is my interview, and with every councillor, I've talked to them about specifics around who they are as people, and I've talked about some of the issues as a part of it. That's why I've said to you all, if you can set aside between 45 and 90 minutes, we'll have time for most of it. Probably not all of it. Some people haven't had all the same questions, but I have 3 pages of notes. They're right up there on my wall to talk to some of those issues. Up there I have
can we stop talking about you
transport
and ask them questions that
I haven't
are relevant
talked
for the city and the
No,
council?
I will, Lee, you're welcome. You're welcome to be here or not be here. This is my interview that I offered you space for. You're welcome to be here. I want to talk to you. I will conduct my interview in the way I want to, And if it doesn't suffice,
let me know when the lecture's over and I'll come back to you.
I'm sorry, but you just spent 3 minutes filibustering telling me how I'm supposed to do it, and I'm telling you how I am doing it. I spent 3 minutes telling you what the 3 main issues are for people in Dunedin, which you have avoided.
I
guess that's 3 minutes less you're going to have to talk about that when I start asking you about them, Lee. After we clean up,
you are going to start. I look forward to that.
After we clear up a nationwide news story that you were involved with yesterday, that a lot of people in Dunedin
news stories all over the place.
I know you do, and normally it's about things like not paying parking tickets, Lee, and that's why I actually gave you an opportunity to clear that up.
Your use of the word normal there, mate, is, I'm afraid, quite deeply offensive. Please retract.
The use of normal in what way?
That it's normal for all the news to be about my $12 parking ticket.
I've done 2 weeks research on you, Lee, and the information that comes up when you do a Google search on you from news agencies. I've been trying to get to a question. I've been trying to get to a question for 4 minutes, Lee, but you're still talking. I've been trying to get to a question for 4 minutes about spending.
You are preaching at me. You're not asking me a question. Ask me a question.
Okay. You say on your blog that you're proud to have debated against so much wasteful debt-funded spending.
Yes.
I would like to know. I would have been here 4 minutes ago, Lee, before you went.
Stop preaching. Get on with it.
I would like to know how you can justify costing taxpayers over $100,000 with an event that started with a packet ticking and an alleged inappropriate response, and where that money is going to be paid for out of the budget for the council. Will that $100,000 plus be spent out of debt-funded money for all your high court and court action, or will it come from a surplus? Where will that money come from to pay that bill that you've lumbered on the ratepayers of Dunedin?
One, I have not lumbered it on the ratepayers of Dunedin. Our bureaucracy has decided, rather than use their own in-house lawyers, to bring in some very expensive consultant lawyers to basically cover their position. That has been their decision. There was no need for them to bring in lawyers and $100,000 worth of them at all. They could have negotiated with my lawyer at any time and come to some agreement. If that wasn't possible, they could have used their own in-house lawyers. I haven't spent anything like that, and I've got a much better lawyer than they have, I believe. The courts just haven't decided that they were going to go with it. We haven't been well served by the law in this case. It was not my decision to spend $100,000 on the legal action. That was done by our bureaucracy, by our chief executive. That was her decision to make. Don't blame me for that. What you do want to look at is the millions of dollars that I've saved ratepayers in being the outspoken councillor that I have been for 15 years now.
And now that it's got to the end of the process, are you going to take it anywhere from here on in? You've got to the Supreme Court. Is it done and dusted?
We have a definitive decision from the courts that they have decided that there isn't a reputational harm issue here, despite what I think is pretty obvious to most normal people. That is the end of the process. We now know that if any elected representative wants to criticise a staff member, that staff member can take a code of conduct anonymously against that elected representative and slay them in the media publicly, and they can do it as a smear campaign prior to an election, and there's no legal recourse. We now know this. There's nothing you can do about it. So future elected representatives, beware.
You say on your hoardings around the city, one of the things you want to do is DCC priority referendums. What does that mean? That seems different from any other candidate that's out there. What is DCC priority referendums? Explain that to us. What's that? Something obviously it's one of your things you want to put out there as a would-be mayor.
Great, and thank you for the question.
You're welcome.
Discussions with Michael Laws, who was mayor of Wanganui, he had a similar problem in terms of not having good consultation arrangements and just the same 200 submitters showing up every year. So what he decided to do was send out a priority list of, say, 12 or 14 different major projects that the council was considering, send it out with the rates demands, and get people to send it back with what their priorities were for that list. It had such a good response, a better response, in fact, than the number of people that voted. He got over 40% for the response to that consultation. It was a far better consultation, and it allowed him, as I understand it, to move down the list of priorities, things like the proposed art gallery that they wanted, and move up the list of priorities, things like better footpaths, which were falling apart in Wanganui at the time. So a real good way of getting people to actually let the council know what was important to them, rather than some ideology from Wellington or whatever.
How do you protect, if you're going to, are you saying that the referendums would, you're saying decide the priority of what you're trying to do, but not necessarily decide what you do? Because there's a slight difference there.
There is quite a difference. There will still be times when the council will do things, even though they believe the public are either misinformed or just don't have the right idea in terms of what needs to be done. But my view is that if the councillors are aware that there's a very large number of the population that are very keen on something, and the consultation through this priority referendum has been very widespread, then they're much less likely to go against it in their decisions than if they just get the same 200 people that come and want more cycleways every year, which is what we've had for the last 3 years.
So what happens if it's the same, I mean, let's pick a bigger number, the same 10,000 people? Does that make it any more valid than the same 200 people? Because that's still a massive minority of the city.
10,000 is how many times better than 200?
Yeah, 500. But I'm saying it's still a very big, significant
it's 500
minority.
times better than the current consultation that we've got. And I expect it to be actually 1,000 times better. Even if it was twice as good as the consultation we got, it would be good. But 500 times better is brilliant. You get some more numbers in there. You don't have to be too far into the statistics to know that this is a much better kind of consultation.
Under that system, how do you protect minority views?
That is how you protect minority views.
But you're basically kind of saying going with a consensus. A minority view could be, typically wouldn't be a consensus, wouldn't be the majority of people. So if you go to a referendum to inform where your priorities are, how do you protect the minority view, which wouldn't necessarily be up the chain of things that a lot of people think you should be doing?
Are you suggesting that the majority should actually pay for a minority view that they disagree with? That's what it sounds like.
I think that we have minority views all the time. I mean, if you're a dog owner, you're a minority. Dog owners are a minority in the country.
And I am a dog owner. $100 a year for the registration was ridiculous.
But so that's my point. It's like we have dog parks and we have things provided for a minority, dog owners. How do you protect a minority view when they are being provided for? And I'm not saying dog owners, whatever the minority is, whatever the smaller percentage is, in a situation where you're having referendums to help you decide what the priorities are.
If you have a referendum and you have a lot more people giving you their view, then your minorities will be much more obvious in that as well.
But they'll be the minority view. So you were saying that your referendum would represent minority view. So in other words, the referendum that had a 10% response somewhere, a minority view, how would that be represented? Because sometimes when we do what's done for the minority, it's still the right decision to make. And if we do what's done for the majority, so how do we ensure that we're doing what, and I'm not even picking a particular minority, but how do we make sure that if it's the right thing to do, we do what's needed to be done for a minority if we're following a system via referendum where the majority are helping us rate what is important? I think it's quite a clear question. It sounds like you're not quite getting it.
So simply, they're not binding referendums.
Yeah, I've got that.
Right.
But it's helping you to set them.
What these referendums are doing is they're actually informing councillors, giving them real consultation, far better than what we've got now. How can that be a bad thing for getting better value for most of your ratepayers? And why is it that you want to get totally hung up on minorities when it's minorities that have been skewing the spending of this particular council so extremely? And I'm talking about particularly the 200 submissions that we just had recently on cycleways. We never had any more than single figure submissions on anything other than there was this bulk lot of submissions on cycleways. And it's the same people every year. And yes, they're very effective. And yes, they have had hundreds of millions spent on cycleways.
Yeah.
At the expense of most of what really needs doing in Dunedin.
I find it fascinating that you're asking how would I get hung up on the question about minority. I think it's a very obvious question. It's not me saying don't listen to the majority and be informed by them. It's me saying we have a society or a community or a city or a country, whatever it is, that we have to also make sure that some smaller groups, whatever those smaller groups are, aren't then just bulldozed over for everything by the majority. We don't have mob rule, and it's a pretty fair question to go, if you're going to follow that system, cool, fine, I get that, I get the rankings, but sometimes some of those things at the bottom of the rankings, which would be, voted on by a fewer people, would still be the correct and right thing to do. And I'm wondering if you're in a council that's actively putting the referendums out there, that's going to get a lot of people saying this is the most of the things we want to do. If there are those things down the bottom that are still the right thing to do, how do you protect that?
You have your councillors who will argue for those things, and they will put that argument in alongside what your majority view is. And there is the view, and this is a very worrying view that we've had on council, and Councillor Fiscal has highlighted it saying she's a communist, and Mayor Hawkins has highlighted it by saying what I think you're trying to say, and he said that majority vote will never serve minorities. This is the argument you're making.
No, it's not.
It isn't
that's not true.
In fact, if you look, it's completely false, but that's what he said, and he said it in a public meeting, and I've got it on video. Please hear me out.
I will, but
The fundamental of democracy is that the majority of people get to have their say, and since the majority are paying for it, the majority should have mostly what they believe is for them.
So what if the majority of people tell you that rates should be halved? As mayor, what would you do?
I would have to convince the councillors that needed to be listened to, and that we should at least not be raising the rates.
Normally get what they want, is what you just said, and they should, because they're the majority of people. What if the majority of people in Dunedin wanted their rates halved? How would you serve those people?
I would argue with the councillors, and I'd put up a paper with all the details and the results of halving the rates and what that would mean in terms of cutting back services and what it would mean in terms of job losses. I'd put all that in a report to the councillors, along with what the majority wanted, and let them vote on it.
Would you support it personally if the majority wanted it?
No, I wouldn't. I would support a zero rates increase. I wouldn't support cutting it in half.
I'm going to ask you also about the rate. That's another one on your billboard. I'm looking at your billboard right now. Stop rates and debt rises. So stop rates rises. With this debt that we've got that's going up, one of the ways, obviously, to reduce debt, be it personal or public, is for more income to come in. It's one of the ways. Rates rises could also help reduce debt. How would you reduce? Would you have a target to reduce? Or would you just stop the debt where it is and pass it on to the next council?
No, you would stop debt and rates rises. To trade one off against the other means you're still not going to look at the fundamental waste and the fundamental problems that beset a runaway bureaucracy and lolly scramble type politics, which is what we've had. So yes, if you wanted to reduce debt, you could massively increase rates. That's not what I'm proposing. I'm proposing that we reduce both, that we stop the constant requirement for increasing rates and debt. And there are so many people around these days that have had so many rates rises, they think it's not possible anymore. But you only have to go back to the last businessman mayor that we had, which was Cliff Skeggs. He built the whole civic centre without raising rates or debt. He made sure that there was none of the kind of shenanigans that are going on now with extraordinarily expensive costs for doing contracted work for the DCC, which simply don't exist in the real world. For instance, each one of those little concrete steps going down by the St. Clair saltwater pool is costing us $7,666 at the moment. If you've ever made yourself a concrete step before, you'll know that $7,666 per little step is insane money. That's the kind of problem that we need to get down on.
So
we
what
also
you're saying,
need to stop spending so much on cycleways. They simply aren't. There's no business case to show that they're a good investment.
I mean, I want to come back to this. One of the things about why I'm trying to come in there occasionally is because when you say three things, I want to respond to each one of them. So I'm writing one of them down, which is business case.
I've had the same problem with you.
What you're saying is rates are going up and debt is going up. Is that correct? At the moment.
And by many times the rate of inflation.
Okay.
Inexorably for many years now.
Okay. So if you stop rates, that means obviously if debt's going up, that means that we are spending more than we have. That's
yes,
how
not living within our means.
Correct. So therefore, if you cap the rates, how do you bring down what we're spending already to at the very best be stagnant, meaning, you know, no more debt, but as you say, in an ideal world, be less? That sounds like a lot of reductions, because I would imagine that budgets, let's say for the next 2, 3, 4 years of infrastructure, let's say, has probably been budgeted for and assigned and put out there.
Yep.
So if I'm stopping paying, if I'm keeping my rates at X amount for the next 3 or 4 years,
yes,
how does the already spending too much not just become spending enough, but spending less? That would sound like a significant amount of reduction. And where does all that come from?
It is a significant amount of reduction.
Specifically, where does that specifically come from?
Specifically, $10 million on the car parks for Park and Ride in Burnside and Mosgiel. Park and Ride is a bit of ideology that was never going to work. It's going to be less successful than the one-way street system cycleway, which is totally underused. It's an absolute waste of money. There's an easy 10 million. The proposed 20 million that they're going to put some cycleways and prettify the streets around the university. This is not the university itself. This is just the university environs, right? They're starting Albany Street at the moment. There's another 20 million. Then there's the 16 million that they want to spend diverting one-way street traffic to the other side, to the harbour side of the railway line. $16 million to divert traffic off a perfectly usable, free-flowing one-way street system. It's another 16 million we can save. 4 million for a new hydroslide. Do we really need a new hydroslide? You know, a new hydroslide would be nice. I'd actually quite like one. Kids love it. But, you know, $4 million, I can't see it. Let's patch up the old one if it needs patching up. The list goes on. 31 million extra, just extra in the last budget for cycleways in South Dunedin, and then there's the tunnel trails. I think it's $50 million altogether they want to spend on cycleways out there. And there's this claim, this nebulous claim that somehow it's going to bring tourism, there's going to be a massively wonderful investment. There is no business case that would suggest that even vaguely is going to break even, let alone actually be worth anything as an investment. So
we're just cancelling all that?
Defer or cancel, absolutely. And what I would be doing... Sorry?
Explain the difference for a ratepayer between defer or cancel.
Okay, when you defer something, like the hydroslide, that means you're going to do it later. When you cancel it, like the Burnside and Mosgiel Park and Ride car parks, $10 million, that means you just drop it as a bad idea. It's never going to happen. So cancel means stop altogether. Defer means do it later if you can afford it.
Yeah, I mean, I know what the two words mean. I was saying specifically for this, what do they mean? What would you defer? What would you cancel? So I was jotting down as you were talking, and it was maybe 70, 80 million. I mean, there's probably going to be more things that you can't think of right now. You were saying we're going backwards at $100 million a year at the moment. So are you able to, not, I don't mean right now, but I guess when you're looking through the books and stuff, find that $100 million that could be taken out of the next 3 or 4 years of your term per year to then keep these numbers the same?
Yes, in fact, on my Facebook pages and on my blog, I've listed 159 million of defer or cancel.
Do you need to find 400? Is it a 4-year term or a 3-year term? I forget. It's a 3-year term for me.
It's a 3-year term.
So do you need to find $300 million if we're going at 100 million backwards a year at the moment? Is that how it works?
No, what we're doing at the moment is we're increasing debt by 100 million each year.
Yeah.
So what we do next year is we just don't do that 159 million that was going to increase it by 105 million. We don't just flatline debt, we can actually pay a bit back if we manage to cancel and defer. But I don't imagine that any council coming in will want to cancel and defer all of that list. But if you've got $159 million worth of it, if you can defer two-thirds of it, defer or cancel two-thirds of it, then you've got a situation where you are no longer adding $100 million to the debt. You're no longer having your debt-funded lolly scrambles.
As I understand it at the moment, with our Three Waters infrastructure, Dunedin's pretty good on drinking water, pretty good on sewerage. Our stormwater needs some work. What's in the budget at the moment, like cost-wise, to get our Three Waters, what it would cost Dunedin ratepayers, assuming that we paid for it, to get it up to scratch and, you know, to be able to move forward so places like North East Valley don't flood every time it rains and whatever's happening down in South D and all that kind of stuff? What kind of money is needed there, that, imagining that it stayed within the Dunedin concept, that Dunedin needs to put into that to bring it up to the standard we need it for, let's say for 2050, because if we do it for 2022, then in 10 years time, it might be out of, you know, it might be too old again. What kind of money do we need to spend as ratepayers to get it up to grade?
There's hundreds of millions that needs to be spent over time. There's no doubt about that. What we have recently decided to do is add $51 million to our already significant Three Waters campaign. It's not a campaign. We have a very large Three Waters budget for upgrading, particularly sewage and stormwater, and because the drinking water is usually pretty good. And we just recently added another $51 million to an already significant budget. I don't know if it's more or less than 100 million. So I actually voted against this last 51 million addition on the basis that the stormwater system is significantly improved on what it was in 2015. We've recently had a record rainfall that had no flooding in South Dunedin at all, and we didn't even have to turn on the big Lawyer's Head pump, which is something which should have been done in 2015, but nobody did because they didn't have regional council permission. So what I'm saying is that we have recently put, I think, too much money into the Three Waters, an extra 51 million that we shouldn't have put in, because it's basically just going to be a gift to MP Mahuta and the takeover if they manage to pull it off through the next election.
Well, that was one of the points I was going to come back to. I know you want to keep our Three Waters in Dunedin ownership, you're saying, but if there's hundreds of millions of dollars of costs needed to upgrade the system and keep it upgraded, wouldn't that be a good reason, one good reason, to go with Three Waters? Because then the cost goes on centralised government as opposed to going on Dunedin ratepayers. What I'm saying is that would actually help you reduce your debt burden, or perhaps reduce your outgoings, which would help you reduce the debt burden if someone else was paying for that.
Except someone else won't be paying for it. Dunedin ratepayers will be billed directly by a 50-50 iwi central government organisation. And not only will they be billed for it directly, separate from their rates, but there's no way it can be cheaper than what we're doing here currently. If you look at the major consultant report that we've had on it, it looked at all the councils in Otago and Southland and looked at the effects of what Three Waters would be, and it came to the conclusion that Dunedin would benefit the least from any of the benefits for the whole area, because we already have a relatively good system. We have a long 150-year history of actually building up something that really does work quite well, and under Three Waters we will end up subsidising all sorts of little systems, little rural systems, small town systems, marae systems, whatever, all over the country. I don't think that Dunedin people should have to do that. We've built a wonderful asset here. We should keep it.
You said we'd benefit the least. You didn't say we wouldn't benefit. So therefore, if other areas are benefiting by 50% and we're benefiting by 10% or 5% or whatever it is, it's still a benefit though, isn't it? You said benefit the least.
No, I didn't say we would benefit the least. I said that that in the report, it said that if there were any benefits,
okay, you didn't say that before.
Out of all the other councils, we would benefit the least. And it's because we're the biggest metropolis and we have the best established systems.
What do you think about people who aren't using an infrastructure contributing to it? Like, so for example, we all know the story about Clutha, who apparently needs $300 million to sort their stuff out. And there are some people who are saying, why should we contribute towards Clutha's bill, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think about the idea of, you know, we're only as strong as our weakest link, and if Clutha's weak, people from other parts of the country contributing to help them out is not necessarily a bad thing. Do you buy into that philosophy at all?
No, it's communism. Doesn't work. What it means is that the slackers that have never actually got their stuff together, the people that haven't seen it as a priority, the people that in the small towns that haven't bothered about their water supply, they suddenly want the big cities to pay for a far better system for them. We in Dunedin have raised our standards much higher than most other people. Are we going to have to suffer lowering our standards again to subsidise other places and people that haven't? No, I don't believe it's appropriate.
How would it lower our standards, our standard of living, out of interest?
Because we'd end up paying for it.
So, but how would that lower our standards?
Well, because we no longer can afford to keep our standards up at the level that they are. We would benefit the least if there was any benefit.
So how do you feel about some complaints that I've heard coming out of Mosgiel on why they should therefore contribute through their rates to funding what's happening in Blueskin Bay with their pipes? They don't, it's the same philosophical theory. They don't use them. They're not a part of it. They live in a different part of the region. It's kind of the same philosophical argument that people in Mosgiel have said to me, why should they contribute to what's happening in Blueskin Bay? It's a little bit the same as what happened in the 90s with the reticulated water system over on the peninsula, that there was a conversation as why should Dunedin and big Dunedin actually contribute towards the peninsula who had a bad system and needed to get onto it. How's Otago helping Clutha any different from Mosgiel helping Blueskin Bay or Dunedin helping the peninsula?
It's vastly different. And the main difference is that in this catchment area, with our system, we all pay towards it. Peninsula pays towards it, Waikouaiti pays towards it. Clutha doesn't pay a dime. We have our system, which we decide on the priorities of, and we decide on the priorities based on what's best for everybody, Mosgiel to the peninsula, Waikouaiti, whatever. To suppose that this quite separate group and quite separate funding should suddenly start funding Balclutha and goodness knows who else in the rest of the South Island. To me, it's, it's so totally different that I'm amazed you asked the question.
I'm asking about the philosophical aspect of an area that doesn't use the infrastructure.
You are asking for a group who pay in one area to subsidise a completely unrelated, with a completely different history in another area. It's not even Robin Hood. It's just doesn't make any philosophical sense to me at all.
Fair enough. I mean, I think it's a pretty clear connection between one group of people not using infrastructure in another area. I guess what you're saying is because of the boundaries that have been decided, you see it as the same from, you know, the southernest side of Dunedin to the northern side of Dunedin. I'm saying philosophically, it's no different really from a region to the north and a region to the south, albeit I obviously agree that there are different areas, but it's to me, it's the same argument for people not using infrastructure, paying for something they're not using.
Let's be absolutely clear that the people in Mosgiel and the people in Waikouaiti and the people in the peninsula get exactly the same quality water, which we all pay for collectively. The people in Balclutha do not have that same quality of water. To suggest that the people in our region, Mosgiel, Waikouaiti, peninsula who all get the same water quality, all get the same good hydrant pressures for fighting fires, all get the same service, should suddenly have to subsidise Balclutha, which is where I come from originally, by the way. You know, it makes no sense to me at all. Who would vote for that? Only Balclutha.
You're talking about the water quality and stuff, but that's what's happening around parts of Dunedin have lower water quality. So we don't all currently get the same water quality.
Yes, they do.
But it wasn't certainly at one stage, like we talk about the peninsula in the 90s, a long time ago, but it wasn't the same then before they went on the town system. So look, I mean, I think it's
they're all on the town system now. Please don't bring up historical irrelevancies.
I don't think it's historical.
Water now.
Well, all history is what's happened before. If the laws or the rules were to change tomorrow, then that would be the current, and then history would be how we used to do it. I think that the argument that because we're not using it, we're not a part of it, we shouldn't pay for it. I think that can be applied to a local area, local body. People, I mean, this might be silly to you, but people who don't have dogs don't contribute towards the dog parks, don't contribute towards the resources for the city that have dogs. I mean, it happens all over the place.
Which is why we have such a high dog fee that pays for all the dog parks and all the dog-related services. And that's an argument for it. It should be a lot cheaper because it's a very inefficient service, but the fact is that people that have dogs do pay for those services.
With the one ways becoming two ways, the idea of the one ways becoming two ways, did you sign on to the email that went to Waka Kotahi that Jules Radish would have put together? Were you involved with that, signing on to go up to head office and say how unhappy with the process some councillors were?
I didn't sign it, no.
What do you think of that? I'm asking it probably as a potential mayor as well. If you had councillors who sort of went above the head of the the process to voice their views to head office, so to speak. What do you think of the process and how that happened?
I think it's unfortunate that we didn't all get to put our signatures on it collectively, which is what I think should have happened. But I think that the view that was expressed was one that needed to be expressed, and I'm glad that Councillor Radick did it.
So what, you support it in principle, but you didn't sign on to the actual document?
Yes.
I was just having a look. I had a story. So you didn't sign on to it because the ODT listed it that you were on the email. I'm sorry, I didn't have this prepared. I wasn't going to talk about it, but the council email is there, and it says Andrew Wiley, Carmen Houlihan, Doug Hall, Jules Radick, Lee Vandervis, and Rachel Elder. So you're saying you didn't sign on to that email that Councillor Radick sent?
I didn't see the specific email. I agreed with the contents of it. I agreed with the discussions that went into it. But no, I never saw the email until quite recently.
Oh, okay. No, this is actually an interesting point, because when I spoke to Councillor Houlihan, she said to me as well she couldn't remember signing it. Subsequently has come to me and said, oh, no, I did agree to it. But it sounds like you're saying that Councillor Radick added your name to the email without your permission first, but subsequently you agreed to it. Is that sort of what you're saying?
No, basically what I said is that we basically agreed on the position. We talked about these things quite a bit, and that Councillor Radick sent off the email based on agreed positions that we had. But what he should have done is shown me the email first with its specific wording. But as it is, he basically expressed quite well, I think, what we thought of the two-weighing of the one-way street system, which is it's going to be an utter disaster. That's
a really interesting thing for him to have done. I'm a bit
interesting. I agree.
I'm an examples person, and I'm thinking, like, if we were working at the same place, and we had a boss above us, Lee, and I said to you in the room, man, I hate how this new system's working. The new lunchroom system, it's terrible. And then you sent an email off to the boss going, me and Pat thinks this new system is terrible. That would be really inappropriate, even though we'd talked about it and agreed to it, because it's not okay to put my name on that email to go to the boss. So if how you're explaining it now is the situation, then that comes across to me. I mean, it was it was listed, I think, as an abuse of process. I don't know if that's clear or not, but certainly that doesn't seem to be, at the very least, it's not the appropriate way to send a complaint up the chain. I think that would be fair to say.
I think the sending of the complaint was fine. What it lacked was a proper finalisation of all parties seeing the exact wording before it went off.
Yeah. All right. So even though you
I agree that that isn't ideal, and you know, it's not like there was a time limit. He should have got round to all of us and had our signatures specifically on it.
Right. So you're okay with what he did. You agreed with the concept of it, but you just didn't
I'm not
say,
okay with what he did. I'm okay with the sentiments that
content,
he expressed.
the content
and the content was good, and the content had been agreed verbally. But you know what things are like. When you put things into words, they can start meaning specific things, and certain words will some people will gel with, and other people will say, well, actually, no, that's not quite how I see it. There should have been some more, should have been a better consulted letter.
So if you're mayor, right, and you've got all these ideas that you're going to have referendums and like kind of get the pressure from the people to put on the agenda what you want to see pass through, and then council is going to come on board, and then a minority group of councillors were to do this sort of thing and kind of go above the processes head to whether it's ministers or government officials or whatever and say, we're not happy about this. How would you actually respond to those councillors who have done that?
I would say good on them for actually being proactive and making their views known. I think, you know, I mean, making your views known, I think, is actually a very good thing. I don't think that the mayor should be the muzzle on any kind of complaints that people want to make. If you want to make a complaint to government, you should be able to. If a group of councillors want to make a complaint to a minister, they should be able to. And to claim that that's somehow an abusive process because it doesn't suit the mayor's agenda, I think is rubbish. Do
you think that approaching a higher body officially in your, like if you were to send off an email and go, I'm not writing this as a councillor, but as an individual, so, you know, as one thing, but to send off stuff that's sort of officially as a council representative is different?
Councillor.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I do it regularly. I send stuff off as a councillor, Lee Vandervis, explaining very often that this is a minority view. I sent one to the Electoral Commission regarding the many problems with the 2019 election. And I said, look, this is plainly a minority view, but me, Councillor Vandervis, is really very unhappy with a whole lot of aspects of the way this election's been run, and especially having DCC staff involved in the running of it. I strongly believed, oh yeah, you got it there.
Yeah, that one.
I strongly believe that DCC staff and the bureaucracy should play no part in an election because they are too conflicted, and especially the previous chief executive, who was especially conflicted and had a very strong reason to not want me as mayor. And this actually came out in the court case in the High Court. One of the positives, I think, and one of the learnings from it, and that is how much power and a chief executive who's supposed to just execute the decisions of council, how much power they now have. They can actually make a lot of these decisions. Not a good thing. You've seen it in the regional council as well. Michael Laws has had the same problem there.
The what I get the vibe with, Lee, and take this as you will, is there's a lot of complaints, and sometimes I guess as a councillor or as a mayor, I'd want all that energy as a ratepayer and a voter to be put into things that are going to change the city, and you've got positions on what you do with things like 3 waters and 1 ways, and that's the debatable thing in the chamber and with but there seems to be a lot of noise and a lot of sort of complaints about other things, parking tickets and like, I mean, I did actually find, I didn't know you were going to.
And you're going to do the parking ticket. We did 40 minutes on parking tickets. Can you do an and?
And complaining about why you lost the election.
Right. Let's talk about STV. Let's talk about the number of voting papers floating around the North End. Let's talk about the role of the bureaucracy in actually dealing with voting papers. Let's talk about the role of the chief executive in running a smear campaign against the mayoral candidate most likely in the 2019 election. Let's see what that's all about.
Just clarify one thing. The number of voting papers floating around the North End, are you saying that there is some nefarious action with voting papers? Is there something that's happened illegally or something that's fraudulent? What are you saying?
It's been going on for at least a decade. In the interests of trying to get more people to vote, the Electoral Commission or whoever does the voting paper sends off heaps of voting papers to addresses in Dunedin North in particular for students that have long gone. Consequently, there are voting papers piled up all over the place. There have been Facebook pictures of them fluttering down the gutters in the streets, piled up in stacks in common rooms. Unclaimed voting papers, especially a problem in the North End, in the past, are basically just sitting there waiting to be misused. It's been a problem for a long time. I complained about it in the 2016 election, and I complained about it in the 2013 election as well. I didn't bother complaining about it in 2019 because I had too many other complaints to make. But actually I did. I think I added it to that list.
Well, you're kind of echoing what I was saying about lots of complaints, but I'd really like to have clarity on this. Are you making the claim that there is fraudulent voting going on in the mayoralty election?
I'm saying that I have a lot of anecdotal evidence to suggest that not only was it extremely easy to do, but that it happened as well.
Do you personally believe that the election was stolen?
No, I believe that the election was, that I lost the election because of the smear campaign run by the DCC bureaucracy and jumped on by the ODT reporter, Chris Morris. That's what cost me the 2019 election. I probably cost this election myself in other ways, not taking a vaccination, for instance. So I don't believe that actually lost me the election, but I think it's an election issue that the Electoral Commission should have looked at 10 years ago, and I've simply reminded them of the fact that I have been reminding them for some time now that postal voting papers in bulk floating around the North End is not a desirable situation, and even if they're not misused by anybody, it's an open invitation for misuse, which they should sort out.
You just brought up the idea about not being vaccinated.
Yep.
Why was that? I mean, like, we don't have a lot of time. I don't really want to go past half past. I said it would be 90 minutes. But if we can maybe spitball a couple of things in the last 7 or 8 minutes. I mean, I appreciate, I read, I think from about a month ago, you made a speech at the Free Union debate at Otago University. I think it wasn't there, or maybe it was in a Herald article. You were talking about people who have views should voice them when they're running for mayor. And I appreciate that because one of the things I've been saying about the Voices for Freedom people is that one of the things that concerns me about the news around some of them is they're hiding it. And I'm like, if that's where you stand, if that's the foundation you're standing, not you, if that's where the foundation someone stands on as to why they're running, they should talk about it. Because then as a voter, I'm informed. So I appreciate what I read about you saying that you will talk about your sort of less popular, more minor sort of views. And I'm wondering, so people know where you stand. So that's perfect. That's the fair way for democracy to work. Why didn't you end up taking the vaccine? What was it all about?
I thought that the mandating of the vaccine was a bigger issue than the vaccine itself.
Mm.
I thought that the freedom of choice, and I thought that the Bill of Rights provision number 11, which says you shall never be forced to take any medication, I think that right was more important than whether or not a few people, more or less, get the flu as a result of taking or not taking the vaccine. I've also studied virology since 1990 when I read a book called The Coming Plague. And that book is by Laurie Garrett. It's this thick and it's comprehensive, and it goes through Ebola, it goes through SARS, it goes through swine flu, it goes through all of those things. It goes through how governments and the World Health Organization and the big pharmaceutical companies dealt with each of these different pandemics. And my reading subsequently had made me very cynical about Pfizer coming up with a new, different type of vaccine so quickly, and the overhyping, as I saw it, of the severity of the vaccine, of the severity of the problem. For most people, COVID has basically been a bad flu. In my case, I'm of an age group where I was supposed to be terrified of the effects that this thing might have. To the extent that I went to my doctor and I said, look, what do you recommend for me? I'm a bit dodgy on this new vaccine. It hasn't been properly tested. He said, essentially, you want to look at the priority treatment protocol. This is a doctor I've known since we went to med school. He went to med school, I was at varsity. So I've known him for more than 40 years. And he said, look, I think that this thing hasn't been tested. I don't think that the COVID is that bad anyway. What you want to do is look at having an alternative rather than rush in and take the vaccine. And he suggested the priority treatment protocol, which is a mixture of ivermectin, zinc, and doxycycline. It's proved very effective in a number of countries, Japan in particular, Uttar Pradesh in India, 235 million people.
All the Uttar Pradesh thing, just because we're going to run out of time, the Uttar Pradesh thing has all been debunked, Lee, about the ivermectin use over there, 100%.
And the debunking's all been debunked. All right, let's just forget it. Let's just say that that's what my doctor recommended as an option for me. I went for that option, and when I was asked about it, I gave an honest answer.
Why did you then? Why did you? I disagree with you about being forced a medical intervention like medicine, because no one's been forced to take anything. They've been coerced without question.
You look at the number of people that were fired for not having it.
Yeah.
The people that used to have a job at a Targo museum and were fired because they refused to take the medication. That is being forced.
Lee, they were fired because they didn't take it. That means they didn't take it. That means they weren't forced to take it because they didn't take it. So people weren't forced to take it. I agree that people were
have
coerced
to live.
To take
they
it.
need a job to live.
But you just said people were fired. But you just said people were fired because they didn't take it. If you want to starve
people and drive them out of their houses,
I don't want to do. I don't want to do anything.
Don't tell me different.
I don't want to do anything.
I know some of these people personally.
Sure.
And it's obscene what's happened to them.
And they haven't taken it. So no one's been forced to take it. People have been coerced to take it, like most laws and rules in the country. No one's been forced to take it, because if everyone was forced to take it, then everyone would have it. And there are lots of people who don't have it.
Coerced to take it, then. Is coerced your preferred verb?
Coerced is an accurate verb. It's not my preferred verb, Lee. It's an accurate term.
People are coerced. I prefer coerced myself. To me, coerced is stronger than forced.
No, it's not, because force is a physical action. Coerced is the same as every law in New Zealand.
Let's agree. Coerced.
Sure. I agree. It's a coercion.
I think coercion in that situation was much worse than the issue of the drug itself.
When the rules were made,
some of my family members took it, some didn't.
When the rules were made, why did you feel the need to sort of try and push through it anyway, like the idea of turning up to council without a vaccine pass and kind of trying to push your way on, or trying to attempted, or you did enter the building, I believe, to then get that trespass notice, even though the rules were without a vaccine pass, you weren't allowed in. Why did you feel the need to then, even if you disagreed with the rules, to go kind of stuff the rules, I'm doing it this way anyway?
Because the rules were only here in Dunedin. In Invercargill, they didn't insist on it. In Wanganui, they didn't insist on it. They decided, and I'm pretty sure I know who decided, to make the rule that much harder here. A rule that wasn't necessary, a rule that was local, and a rule that I challenged. And I challenged it for good reason. I believe it was politically motivated.
Well, but it doesn't matter if it was only here. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of rules within local councils that don't they don't apply to other local councils. Yeah, and
some of them are rubbish. Yeah, and if the law is an ass, you should fight it. And the law was an ass in that situation.
But that didn't change anything, did it?
Oh, yes, it did.
How did it change? How did it change the ruling?
Well, for a start, they got rid of it pretty quickly afterwards.
Can you remind me of the dates? Because a lot of mandates went away at a certain time. Was it around that time or not? I don't have the numbers in front of me.
What they did is they went into Zoom meetings, and I refused to accept those as well. And when they got to the point where they were having to fire their most popular councillor because they had created local rules which weren't in existence in a number of other councils around the place, they decided they'd better backpedal and actually let the bugger in after all.
Right.
So it was well worth doing.
I read your speech from the 17th of the 8th, freedom of whatever it was, I'm scrolling back up. Otago University event. Free Speech Union, that one there. You wrote in your speech, and this is my last question because we're basically out of time. For me, the Prime Minister's self-crowning as the single source of truth with regards to COVID science was the last straw. Why did you see that as so abhorrent when the Prime Minister said that?
Because a single source of truth, as Nelson Mandela has said, is simply not appropriate. There is no way that you can have a single source of truth. A single source of truth defines tyranny. It doesn't define democracy, and it certainly doesn't define people being able to research things themselves and come to their own conclusions. A single source of truth is telling you this is what's happening, this is what you're going to accept, and they were wrong.
Do you know the context around when that was said and why it was said?
I've put the video on my blog.
So you know the context? I mean, do you think context is important?
Are you talking about the several minutes of video before she actually said it?
Oh, that as
or
well
are you
as
talking about some wider context?
I'm talking about the context as to what she said and when she said it and why she said that.
Well, you can argue about a much wider context all you like, but that's what she said. And I would like to know what kind of context you think, other than what's in the several minutes of video, where it's all plain for everyone to see. I'd like to know what kind of context might actually justify that fundamentally tyrannical statement.
Let's show it.
Some days, and this is not unique to New Zealand, that in the midst of what is a global issue, as you would expect, there are a number of rumours that circulate. I am present on social media, or I see it myself. I cannot go around and individually dismiss every single rumour I see on social media, as tempted as I might be. So instead, I want to send a clear message to the New Zealand public. We will share with you the most up-to-date information daily. You can trust us as a source of that information. You can also trust the Director General of Health and the Ministry of Health. For that information, do feel free to visit at any time to clarify any rumour you may hear, covid19.govt.nz. Otherwise, dismiss anything else. We will continue to be your single source of truth. We will provide information frequently. We will share everything we can, everything else you see, a grain of salt. And so I really ask people to focus.
The context of the conversation, and you might know this, Lee, and I'm not trying to educate you, but for people that don't know, was 2 weeks after the first case of COVID was in New Zealand. Mis and disinformation that had been going around the world now making its way into New Zealand culture. And at that time, the government saying, today, we have the best information, we have the most up-to-date information, this is where you get that. The government didn't say that 6 months later, a year later, they don't say it now. It was because it was the start of the pandemic where actually we were all still learning things and the government had the most up-to-date information. At that point, I mean, I probably wouldn't have used those words quite like that, but what is happening now is people are using that quote now to talk about this tyrannical government, where in the time, which was 2 weeks after the first case of COVID got to New Zealand, the people who knew best what was going on in that moment was the government.
No, they weren't.
They were fighting, and they were fighting the mis and disinformation. Yes, it is.
Look, you're a government apologist. You keep repeating the government line. The fact is that that's not true. It was the first 2 weeks after a case had come in New Zealand, but there'd been many cases and a great deal of information in a great number of countries prior to that. what Prime Minister Ardern claims in that video is not only that she's going to be the single source of truth, but that the Ministry of Health Information, Information will be sent out to everybody. My doctor has had to ask me for Ministry of Health information because he hasn't been getting it. And that's been going on for over 2 years now. I have quoted things to my doctor here in Dunedin from the Ministry of Health that he hasn't seen because they don't send it to the doctors. I've been into the Ministry of Health website. I've actually quoted them publicly on things they've said to the extent that they had to retract them because they didn't agree with the government narrative. And there was far more and far better information available overseas than anything we've ever got from our government. So much for your single source of truth.
Well, we will agree to disagree on that one. I think it's pretty clear that within 2 weeks of a pandemic coming to this country, the people that had the best knowledge at that point, and only at that point, were the people who could see all the moving parts. And I don't think there's anything nefarious about it. And I think for people who use that today, I'm not actually accusing you of doing this, Lee, but there are plenty of people who do, who use that today, who claim that that's possibly still what's going on today, is disingenuous at best and downright just lying at worst, I guess. Anyway, Lee, that's us.
You're incredibly naive to think that the government is always going to be telling you the truth. And that our government in particular,
see how you just didn't repeat to me what I said?
Around the world that have far more access to information than they've ever had.
I wonder, Lee, if this is a common tool you use. You just repeated back to me not what I said. When you just said that I always think that the government is that. I didn't say that. In fact, what I said very clearly was, in that moment, on that day, 2 weeks into it, I'm more than happy to accept they had the best information. Your response was that I'm an apologist, and I always think. No, I'm actually not naive. I'm very well versed on the whole thing, Lee. But we're now 7 minutes over our 90 minutes. Thank you for joining us in the conversation that we're having with Dunedin Mayoralties. We will leave it there for today. And if people want to find out more about you and what you're all about, leevandervis.com is probably the best place for them to go. Would that be fair?
Yeah, on my Facebook page, it's got easier access, probably.
Very good. For those people who aren't blocked. Lee, thank you for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity and for the last 40 minutes. The first 40 minutes, I